It is 6:02, and I expect we will have a few more people join us. So we will just go ahead and get started. Thank you guys so much for joining us. My name is Mary, and I am with Fairygodboss. For those of you who don't know, maybe Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women, and we provide women with a ton of information on everything from work-life balance to salary to maternity leave policies to fabulous career content. And we are so excited to work with our friends Talkspace on today's webinar about how you can manage stress and anxiety at work. I know we have all been there before. Before I hand it over to Linda to get started and talk a little bit about Talkspace, I just want to go over a few logistics. Linda will be kicking off with a brief presentation on how you can manage stress and anxiety at work. And then if you will take questions at the end. If you have a question, you should see the little Q&A button at the bottom. If you just want to click that and type it in, and then I will facilitate for all of you guys. You also have the option to ask a question anonymously if you feel more comfortable that way as well. So without further ado, I am pleased to hand it over to Linda.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Sugar, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I live actually in Syracuse, New York. And I work for Talkspace, and I've worked for Talkspace for about 3.5 years. And Talkspace is an online therapy platform that makes mental health care more convenient and affordable by connecting users everywhere with a growing network of 2,000 plus licensed therapists. With Talkspace, the user can send unlimited text. That means everyone has their own little room. In that room, there's also a place for audio, video, and you can send picture messages to your therapist there via the web browser. And there is a Talkspace mobile app that you can do it right from your phone. So you can do it anywhere. Some people do it on the subways. You can do it anywhere you want to type to your therapist. It's open. The room is open 24 hours a day, and we come on a couple times a day to answer the post. So let's talk about what stress is and how we manage it. According to the American Psychological Association, anxiety is an emotion characterized by feeling of tension, worried, thoughts, and physical changes that increase the blood pressure. Okay, I want to just start off by saying the most stressful thing we do all day is we get out of bed. And most people don't know that, but actually that is what causes the most stress in our day, because we're going from a quiet state to a moving state. And that actually is very, very stressful to our bodies. So I just wanted to give you that little piece of advice. Okay, I think I went ahead. Make sure. It is important to know the difference between normal feelings of anxiety and what anxiety disorder is. So many of us feel anxiety, and when we're faced with potential harm or worrying triggers, the feelings of anxiety are not only normal, but necessary for survival. For example, if there's a fear of hitting a car, if you have a fear of hitting a car, being hit by a car, one looks both ways before they cross the street. If you see a snake, you're going to get a little bit of anxiety over it. Once that trigger is gone, then the anxiety should subside. So once the snake disappears, within minutes, the anxiety should go. I want to first talk about 5 main types of anxiety disorders. The first one, and most that people suffer from in the United States, is general anxiety. And that's just an excessive, long-lasting anxiety and worries about non-life specific events. So if I was to ask you, what are you worried about? Your answer might be, I don't know. I'm just worried all the time, but I don't know what I'm really worried about. There's nothing that's triggering it that you can pick up. I'm just worried. This affects about 6.8 million adults in the country and 3.1 of the US population. 43% of those are receiving treatment for it, and women are most likely to be affected than men. The second is a panic disorder. That's when you actually get the panic attacks, the shaking, the confusion, the dizziness. Some people, some people listening might actually have had a panic attack. You feel your heart racing, you can't breathe, you think you're going to die, you're having a heart attack. It's really scary thing for you to experience, and you don't know initially what's happening. That affects about 6 million adults, or 2.7 of the US population. Again, women are twice as likely to be affected as men. Phobias. This is an irrational fear of avoidance of an object or a situation. For example, fear of flying. You know, some people have fear of going outside. That's what we call a phobia. About 19 million adults, or 8.7 of the US population, suffer from this. Women, again, are twice as likely to be affected than men. Obsessive compulsive disorder. This anxiety disorder is characterized by thoughts or actions that are repetitively distressing or intrusive. OCD affects 2.2 million adults, or 1% of the US population. OCD is equally common among men and women, and the average age of onset is 19, with 25% of cases of people with OCD occurring by age 14. For obsessive compulsive, that person needs to have everything in order. They're the person you see washing their hands over and over. They may actually have numbers. A lot of the people I work with have to do things in threes. They do things in fours. They have to have a set routine, or they feel very anxious. The last item is post-traumatic stress disorder. And this anxiety results from previous trauma, such as military combat, sexual assault, a hostage situation, or a serious accident. It often leads to flashbacks, and a person may have behavioral changes to avoid these triggers. PTSD affects 7.7 million adults, or 3.5% of the US population. These are a lot of the people that have been in war. These are a lot of people who have been sexually and physically abused as children. They could have been in, like I said, in a serious accident, or, you know, some of these traumatic things. I've worked with some folks that were in the Twin Towers. That's PTSD. Again, women are more likely to be affected than men. And rape is the most likely trigger of PTSD. 65% of men and 45% of women who are raped will develop this disorder. Why might work be tougher for people who struggle from anxiety? If you suffer from anxiety, your concentration can be lost more frequently than normal, and this could lead to lower job performances. It can lead to a need for micromanaging because of the fear of incorrectly completing a task. When you have anxiety, you're afraid of making a mistake. You're afraid that you're afraid of the shame of somebody calling you out. There's more episodes of loss of work due to not feeling physically well. Did I skip a screen? Let me check. I think I might have. Yes. Let me go back. Sorry, folks. Yes, we did skip a screen. Okay. Let's first talk about the physical symptoms, and then we'll go back in there. Sorry, folks. The physical symptoms of anxiety is you have headaches, stomach aches, the high blood pressure, you feel your heart beating, you might have difficulty breathing, dizziness, sweating, muscle tension, fatigue. How it affects our daily life. Anxiety can lead to depression because you just can't get out of it. It can take your enjoyment out of life because you're so nervous about doing things that you just don't go out and do things. It prevents you from experiencing life at its fullest. That's the phobia piece. It can negatively affect relationships and social life with partners, friends. The need for control over situations in which they're involved can have negative effects on people around and the ones that are close to you, because people with anxiety need to control their environment. If they don't control their environment, then they're scared. Here we go. This is where it must be tougher. And we were just talking about that. I'm not going to go back over that. But more episodes of loss of work to physically not feeling well. One of the things that research has shown is that the mind and the brain cannot determine what pain is. So if you have emotional pain or you have physical pain, when it goes to the brain takes it as pain. And some research has even suggested that something like an ibuprofen would actually take away some of your depression, because the brain does not distinguish between what is pain. They just know, the brain just knows I'm in pain. Whether it's depression, anxiety, whatever, the brain just knows I'm in pain. I need something to relieve it. Anxiety also creates a tendency for people to become defensive in any type of conversation due to constant fears of being fired. So what happens is that if you're a supervisor and you confront somebody who's anxious, they're going to be combative. And when people are combative or argumentative, a lot of times it's due to fear. When people get angry, they're frightened. It's really important to know. And the last one I put down here was they're overwhelmed and easily, and they struggle multitasking. If you have anxiety and you're having trouble keeping your concentration, it's really difficult to multitask. The difference between stress and anxiety, I just want to point this out. Stress is due to an external stimuli and usually passes when the problem is resolved. So as we were talking about, if you come across a bear and you get nervous, you get stressed about it, as soon as the bear goes, it goes away. When you have anxiety that keeps hanging on, even after the problem is resolved, then you probably have some kind of an anxiety disorder. The different type of stressors and anxieties we may encounter at work if we have anxiety. Interpersonal issues such as trouble with coworkers. People with anxiety have a hard time interacting. They don't know what to say. They think they've said the wrong thing. They're waiting for somebody to say something back to them that's hurtful. There's just constant fear. There's also constant fear of being overworked, overwhelmed, and undervalued. So what happens is, because you can't concentrate, because you're not feeling physically well, you feel overworked and you just feel overwhelmed by the whole situation. There's a fear of failure, or the imposter syndrome, causing us to turn down opportunities for projects and promotions because we don't want to fail. If we have anxiety, we don't want that shame to come up or people to think that we are not good enough. It's very important that we recognize that when we have anxieties, a lot of times we do not feel good enough. There's a worry about team projects due to the constant interaction with other people. So people with anxiety are also known as non-team players a lot of the times, because they just can't do that interaction. They're just too anxious to show their coworkers they may not know what they're doing. Ways to handle the previous stressors that we just talked about. We need to cultivate some time management skills. You need to set up a schedule of when you go in, what you're going to do. And I advise a lot of my clients to actually just keep a daily chart for like a week of the things you do, just so you can kind of see how much time you're losing concentration if you have a lot of anxiety, just how much time is going by that you're not actually working, and how much time is actually going by that you are working, because it can be very empowering when you don't think you've got a lot done, and you look at a list and it shows, yeah, I have got a lot done for the day. Plan and prepare in advance, and don't try to wait to the last minute to get things done. Procrastination is not your friend. A lot of people with anxiety procrastinate because of this fear, again, of failure. Work with supervisors on priorities. Take breaks and deep breaths. Set small, manageable goals and reward yourself when you hit milestones. So when you do something, you get a project done, reward yourself. A lot of times supervisors aren't going to say to you, oh, you've done a great job. And if there's supervisors out there that are working with people, it's really important to tell people they've done a good job. Understand that no one is perfect and that everyone makes mistakes. Being overcritically and hard on yourself will only intensify your worries. Communicate even when it's hard. The more you communicate with your team and the boss, the better it is, even though you struggle with that. And that might be one of your phobias, is a social anxiety. Try to communicate. And there's a lot of techniques we can help you learn that can be learned to deal with anxiety and communication. Should you talk to your boss or HR person? If your stress, anxiety levels are interfering with your work performance, it may be helpful to have an honest conversation with your boss and just tell them you get a little bit nervous. Sometimes your self-esteem is a little down, but you've got to know your boss and you've got to know if they're the right person to be able to talk to about this. You may ask the following things of your boss, or if you're a boss, you may want to do this for somebody who has anxiety. Set priorities for them and have your boss set priorities for the person who's anxious. To put tasks in a written format, it's much easier to have it down so you can see what you need to do. To set expectations. Expectations are really important for people who have anxiety. Set boundaries around autonomy. A lot of people are anxious, ask lots of questions, always asking questions, and set clear deadlines. That's what a supervisor can help with. Talk to your HR if accommodations need to be made to complete job tasks or supervisor is not receptive to your issues of anxiety. I don't really recommend initially going to a supervisor unless I don't recommend going to an HR person unless your supervisor is not receptive to you, because it's like going over somebody's head. How therapy can help navigate the murky waters at work. That's where we come in. That's where Talkspace, and we get a lot of people who are trying to navigate that murky waters. Therapy can be an effective tool in supporting your career growth. It can really help you grow. It can help you identify and gain insight into your fears. So one of the things that can help in therapy is you get worksheets and you have things to look at what your triggers are, and you look at what your fears are, and you identify that you have them. Sometimes just saying it's okay for me to have some anxiety makes you feel a whole lot better. It can also give you specific tools to help reduce the anxiety, such as mindfulness training, cognitive restructuring therapy, exposure therapy, and deep breathing exercises. Mindfulness is just basically staying in the present. Cognitive restructuring is kind of like changing the messages that are in our brain, like we're not good enough, or we're going to fail, we're going to be embarrassed, we're not going to do it right, and restructuring them to more positives. Reframing is a really good way to do that. Or exposure therapy and deep breathing exercises are very important. It can also give you specific tools. It can also challenge cognitive distortions about self and work, and a cognitive distortion is just an exaggerated or irrational thought pattern. It provides an objective reality of a work situation and a validation of a person's work life. It also can help you through empowerment to talk with your supervisor and how to set boundaries at work. With the person's permission, a therapist can also mediate between person and workplace, either orally in written form, so we can help you navigate those. I just want to thank you so much for joining us. And I know that Anna's going to take some questions, and then if there's some questions, I will answer anything you need me to answer on stress and anxiety in the workplace.
All right. So as I mentioned when we first got started, there is a Q&A function in your webinar menu. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in and I will start taking them. Give a few minutes to type some stuff. While we wait for a few folks, I have a question for you, Linda.
Okay.
One thing that you mentioned is imposter syndrome, and I think that's something everyone struggles with on some level. Do you have any quick tips or advice on how, if you are struggling with that, how to kind of overcome it?
Yeah, the imposter syndrome is very, very interesting because it's like you think that people are going to see who you really are and they're not going to like who you are, kind of thing. And so you feel like you're faking it. People say that they fake it till they make it. And that's basically a cognitive distortion. So, you know, what you can do is look at, is it a rational belief about yourself, or is it an irrational belief? And many of us have, me included sometimes, irrational beliefs about ourselves and whether we're good enough or what we present to the world. Is it really who we are? And it's very interesting because as children, we're not asked those questions. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? So when I ask somebody in therapy, who are you? They don't know. A lot of people say, I don't know who I am. And so sometimes just realizing who you are by listing all the things you like to do, the things you enjoy, you know, the work options that you have really does help with the imposter syndrome.
That's great. Thanks so much, Linda. Okay, great. Let me see. We have a few more questions. All right. So if you do have some anxiety or you're feeling overwhelmed at work, do you have any exercises you recommend to kind of help you get over your anxious feelings?
Yeah, mindfulness is like the most important, I think. And what mindfulness is you kind of stay in the present. So if you're all out there and you're sitting in your room right now, in a room, in an office, or you're sitting in your living room or wherever you are watching this, just notice things around you. So just take a focus on, maybe there's a flower in your room, or maybe there's a special chair, or put your hand on the chair you're on and just feel that. Get yourself really in the present. And that's what mindfulness is, staying in the present. And if just take a break from work if you feel the anxiety building up, and just put your focus on what's right in your room. And then go back to, if you're on a computer, go back to your screen. That will help. I also tell people, this is a great one, is to put a rubber band around your wrist. And when you're feeling anxiety, just gently expand it and let it hit your wrist and say, stop. And I know it sounds like yeah, it sounds like, oh, why would I do that? Does that really work? And it does work. It's amazing how that little thing can work.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. I imagine it probably refocuses your attention on something else and external. I know something I like to do when I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed is I take a walk, which is very simple, gets you away from whatever is stressing you. It's not always possible when you're on a timeline, but I have found that to be a really helpful strategy.
Another thing is ice water. Okay, another thing that will help with anxiety, because you have your nervous system, is that if you actually drink some ice water, it kind of grounds you, or something ice. Okay, try to stay away from the caffeines, but like a glass of lemonade, something that's kind of cold, it kind of shocks your system, your nervous system, back into like reality, and that sometimes alleviates the anxiety also.
Great. We have a few more questions, and just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, feel free to use our Q&A functionality. So this is a really great one. So you're talking a lot about, we're talking about workplace stress and anxiety. What are some ways an individual can determine what's triggering your anxiety? Like, is it your particular workload, or could it be something more?
A lot of times what triggers us is our past. Okay, I do a lot of what's called CBT, which is working in the present. But a lot of times somebody in our workplace reminds us of somebody. Okay, so if you've had trouble with people in leadership roles, or with a mother or a father, and you get a boss who kind of is in control of you and acts that way, sometimes that can create a lot of anxiety, because your brain stores everything. From childhood up, your brain stores everything. So it could be unconscious. Sometimes we don't know why we're anxious because it's unconscious, and it's locked in the brain from something earlier that's happened.
Very
So
interesting.
what I do have people do though is write down, when they're anxious, and then what we do is scaling. So so if you get anxious, we would come up with a technique, like maybe the rubber band, or writing down something you could do, like taking a walk. And then what we do is we have you write down, okay, what is your feeling before you went for the walk? What is your level of anxiety after you went for a walk? So how does that work? Does it actually change and reduce it, or do you have to find some other technique?
Great. That's all very great tips and things to keep in mind to find out really what is triggering that, so you can deal with it. Okay, here's another great question. So you talked a little bit about from the supervisor's perspective in terms of managing employees. One of our listeners wants to know, for supervisors, how would you recommend addressing someone on your team who might have anxiety issues?
I think, first of all, the person's got to recognize they do. They may, but if they come to you, or if you see they're anxious, just call them. If you do regular supervisions with them, you can say, I noticed that you're a little nervous. Are you okay? What's going on? And then what you can say to them is, if they are, what will help you? Sometimes I don't even address, I'm a supervisor in another job that I have, and sometimes I don't even do that. If somebody comes in and I recognize they're anxious, I say, as a supervisor, I kind of would like to know what you might need to help perform your job better. Is there something I can do to help you, you know, reach your highest performance? That usually opens up the door for people to talk.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and I think something all managers can use in dealing with any of their team members, because I think that's the role of a manager, right? To help remove roadblocks and make sure that their team has everything that they need to perform at their best.
Also, if you have an EAP program, you might want to recommend them to an EAP program if they say they have an anxiety. If they say, I'm just so anxious, I don't feel good enough, if they really open up, at that point you may say, there are places like, Talkspace, of course, but some people have EAP programs, direct them towards some that they might want to get a little bit of help, that it's normal to have anxiety and that they could feel better by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for those of us who may not be familiar with what EAP stands for, do you mind just letting us know so everyone can contact the right resources?
Just one thing I want to say, as a supervisor working with people that have anxiety, you got to be careful, because sometimes you take on what's called secondary anxiety. Like, I know that if somebody comes into my office and they're very anxious, sometimes I can feel myself getting a little anxious. You know, you kind of feel the energy. So I think you got to be careful of that also, that your own, you know, your own self, and how you interact with that person. And that recognize that sometimes people's energy fields do affect our energy fields also. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's important because we're human too. And if somebody's very confrontive in the workplace, they're hard to deal with because they want to be in control, and you know they do, and they argumentative with you. It's very difficult. And if you find somebody who's kind of argumentative, don't keep fueling the fire. If you're a supervisor, you know, just kind of pull back and say, okay, what do you need to be successful? What can I do to help you?
That's great advice. Okay, so we have a few more questions and we have time for a few more. So if anything is on your mind, please feel free to ask. So here's a great question. Someone is wondering, outside of working with a therapist or doctor, are there any other resources you recommend in helping deal with anxiety?
Yes, you can. I'm also kind of holistic. So I think there's some things you can do. There's guided imagery. A lot of people will do some guided imagery. You can get that online. Listening to music is really good, some soft music. Also vanilla, okay? If you're sitting at home and you're anxious and you light a vanilla candle, there's something about the vanilla that actually will calm you down some. So there's things like that you can do. You can read. Um, you could go on the internet and check things. I don't always recommend the internet all that much because the internet, as we all know, can make us crazy. I know it. If you go to look something up, it takes you somewhere else, and before you know it, you got all these symptoms that you really don't have, but according to the internet, you do. And so you have to be really careful with that. But take a nice bubble bath sometimes will help. Take a walk, um, do something good for yourself.
Absolutely. And I love that tip about vanilla. I am going to go out and buy some vanilla candles after this.
Another little tip is if you're anxious and you feel nauseated, peppermint is the best thing for that. If you're one that has stomach issues when you're anxious, if you go out and go buy those little peppermint candies or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
peppermint is also very, very good in settling the stomach.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's such a great tip. I love that. Okay, so we have one last question. So if you have a question, now's your time to ask it because we are on the last one. Someone wants to know if you have any advice on how best to re-enter the workforce after taking some time off for mental health issues.
That is a great question. In fact, I have somebody doing that in my face-to-face practice right now. So if somebody is coming back into the workforce, what you have to do is you really have to get yourself prepared to go back. Hopefully, if you're getting prepared, you've worked with a therapist who can be very supportive of you as you go back. One of the things that I recommend is if it's work stress that got you out, then figure out before you go back what you can do to manage that stress. Whether it's to have a stress ball, some people have stress balls, what you can do, have a plan of action. Okay? Write it down on a sheet of paper. Right? I always tell people when they're going back, get an index card. Write down some positive things on that index card that will keep you grounded and focused while you're at work. So to keep you like relax. That's a big one. Don't sweat the small stuff. Just little sayings that will help you, and just keep it on your desk. Also know that when you get back, you'll also feel like people are looking at you. Like there's like, what happened to you? People will want to know maybe, are you okay? You don't have to answer any of those questions. You can say, I just needed a break. but I'm back. I'm good. Thank you for asking. Um, I also say that you should meet with your supervisor before you go, when you go back. See if you can get a meeting immediately. So the first thing you do is you walk in the door, you meet with your supervisor. If your supervisor is somebody who's supportive, so that they know you're back, that you know they can support you through it. Have some friends that maybe you could text, or you could do something. You're not supposed to be doing that at work, but when you're coming back to work, I think that's important.
Yeah.
If it's anxiety because you've been out on a leave because of personal issues, okay, you'll have developed something that takes care of you with that. So maybe it's something you bring in, that will just help, like a stress ball or something. Just remember, you don't have to answer any questions. You can set your boundaries. Use index cards as a way to ground yourself and center yourself. Um, and it's going to be scary. Re-entering work after you've been out for a while is very scary, and just acknowledge this is fearful, and you know, and make sure that you look at it and you take things 1 minute at a time, sometimes 1 second at a time, and congratulate yourself every minute that goes by, or every hour. Say, I've made another hour, I've done good. And don't expect too much on the first day or two back. You're not going to get a lot of work done. You're going to be so busy, you know, being anxious about being back, that you probably won't get tons done. So don't get down on yourself.
No,
It's
that's also
important.
helpful.
Take care of yourself. It's very, very important that we take care of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I love that note card strategy. I think that's something that anyone could use, you know, in a normal basis, just when you're having a bad day, something that will cheer you up a bit. That's great. Well, we have no other questions. So with that, thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you, Linda, and our friends at Talkspace for partnering with us on this. It was a great conversation, and I know I learned a lot. You'll see on your screen that there are some great ways to stay in touch with both Fairygodboss and Talkspace. If you have questions, email addresses, if you want to sign up for the Fairygodboss newsletter. Thank you all again, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening.